Good morning, Year 3. Today we are going to be talking about the number one best, most amazing, fantastic, joyful thing in the whole world. And can you guess what it is? If you know me, and I hope everyone in CCON knows this, if you know me, you'll know that for me, the best thing in the world is reading. Books and reading and stories, I love them. I love most of them. But I've chosen some very special ones to show you today. I went digging into my old library collection at home, so all the books I've collected over the years, and I found my favourite books from when I was in Year 3 and Year 4. So I'm going to show them to you. I have them here, hidden on the side. They have some really cool front covers and designs, and there's lots of different ones. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reading preferences in general. So it's quite a chilled out lesson today. There won't be a lot of writing, mainly listening and looking, and then a small task at the end. Just like yesterday, if you are in the Indigo and Jade groups, you can stay here and watch this video. But when we get to the task at the end, you don't need to complete the task. You can just skip straight to the writing video, but I'll remind you when we get there. Also, for everybody else, we're not going to start the lesson today by writing the date and the LI. We're going to do that right at the end so that you can just do your date and LI and then start your task straight away. Should be simpler for you. So, this week we finished the book Evie in the Jungle, and I'm sure you all realise that I was really enjoying it. I thought it was a really interesting story. Evie's a great character. I love her special power, and I love how much she cares about animals and for the environment. When we were reading the story, it actually started to make me think that in my past, when I was a kid, I always loved stories where the main character had special powers. Isn't that funny that a lot of the stories that I liked were ones where the main character had special powers? I don't know why I liked those stories. I just thought it was really cool that, one day you could wake up and literally be magic. That really inspired my imagination. So while we were reading Evie in the Jungle, in the evenings after all the lessons, I've actually been rereading one of my favourite books from when I was a kid. And that book is called Wolf Brother. This is the front cover. This is what it looks like. You can see it's got a really cool kind of cave painting design on it. And you can probably guess from the title, it's about a kid whose special power is actually being able to communicate with a wolf friend that he makes. And there's lots of other things that you learn. There's a prophecy, and he has to complete a special task in order to save everyone in this world. It's actually a series, so I've just finished this book. I finished rereading it. I read it in 2 days because it was so good. Look how thick it is, but I still read it in 2 days because I just couldn't put it down. And the other one, I've got a very big, this is my big stack of books. I'm going to show you in a second. The other one's right at the bottom. So the first one is called Wolf Brother, and the second one is called Spirit Walker, and it carries on from the first book. And I think there's lots of books in the series, and this author, who's called Michelle Paver, has actually just released, I think, the 7th book in this series. It's a new one, so I'm going to be really excited to read that soon. I might have to try and either buy it or borrow it from a friend. So, like I said, the reason I like this book is partly because of the main character and his special powers, but also I quite like books that have things like magic in them, where they build this whole different world. This world of this book is not like the world we live in at the moment. It's kind of set in the past where people used to hunt and they used to live in the forest, and there wasn't any technology, there was no mobile phones, and everyone used to be part of a clan. And I just find it really interesting when I'm reading books and it's set in a world that's completely different to the world that we live in. Favourite book number 2, well, this is actually my number 1 book, but I've talked about it so much I didn't want to talk about it too much today, and that is Harry Potter. And you can probably tell it has something in common with Wolf Brother because Harry Potter also has a main character with special powers. I mean, Harry's a wizard, and it's set in a different world where there's all these magical things like magical creatures and wizards and different sports, and there's a school called Hogwarts. So that's how I know that my preference in reading is books with a different world in it, because there's actually 2 of my favourite books have that in common. This version of Harry Potter, you will notice, is not actually in English. It says Harry Potter e la Camera dei Segreti. So I know Amir and maybe Daria, you will recognise that that is in Italian. So you can have a look here. This is what it looks like when the story is in Italian. So I like to read stories in other languages too. What do you like to do? Do you like to read in other languages? Have a think about it. So those are my two books set in another world. I actually have another one that is a book about magic, so you can tell that I really love books about magic. This one is called The Doom Spell, and it's a trilogy, which means it's a set of 3 books. I haven't got the other books with me. It's by this guy called Cliff McNish, and it's a bit similar to Harry Potter because the main character is kind of like a witch. She's got magical powers, but this is different because it's not really set in a completely different world. At the beginning of the story, the girl just lives in the normal world that we live in at the moment, but then partway through the story she uses her magic to get to a completely different land where there's witches and wizards and magical creatures. So this is a really good book, and I like it because the main character's a girl. In Wolf Brother and in Harry Potter, the main characters are boys. But sometimes it's nice to read a book with a different type of main character, and in this one is this really cool girl. So I recommend that book a lot. Apart from books about magic and special powers, I also like books that have a story where somebody does something amazing, like kind of completes a challenge or overcomes an obstacle. And there's 2 books I wanted to show you that are along those lines. The first one, this is actually not the first book, it's a series called the Alex Rider series, and it's about a boy who becomes a spy. So he's just a normal boy, he doesn't have any special powers, but he's just really good at being a spy, and he gets asked by a secret organisation to complete lots of missions and basically save the world. This one is called Skeleton Key, and there's lots of different gadgets and stuff in the story. And you can see how cool the front cover is, it's shiny, each one has a different colour. So I really enjoyed reading this book just because of you feel so tense when you're reading it because you're always wondering, is he going to save the world? Is he going to save the world? And then he does at the end. This is kind of it seems like an opposite book, but actually it's got something in common with Skeleton Key and the Alex Rider series, and that is that the main character or main characters have to overcome some obstacles. This one is called Ballet Shoes. It's actually a very, very old book. I think it might be more than maybe 30 or 40 years old. But it's about 3 sisters, each with a different talent, not like a special power, just one of them's really good at dancing, one of them's really good at making clothes, another one's really good at designing things like being an engineer. They are kind of quite poor, so they live in this house and they want to have ballet lessons and they want to do all these shows and they want to make all these things, but they don't have much money. So it's about how they have to really work so hard to get what they want, and it's really nice because at the end quite a lot of them get famous for the things that they're good at, even though they had so much hardship in their lives. The last type of book that I really like is a book that can make me laugh. I know a lot of you also like books that can make you laugh, and I've chosen a selection of quite a few different types of books that don't seem similar, but the thing they have in common is that when you're reading them, they actually can make you laugh out loud. The first one, you will all hopefully recognise the author Roald Dahl. Do you remember which book he wrote? Hopefully you remember it was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that we studied this term. Such a great story, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, with lots of funny characters and moments. This one is my favourite book from Roald Dahl. It's called Danny the Champion of the World, and it's about a boy who lives with his dad next door to a really, really rich man, and they decide to pull loads of pranks on the rich man and basically steal all his pheasants. So a pheasant is a type of bird that you can actually see in this very interesting illustration here, and basically Danny and his dad have to hatch a plan about how they can get these birds, and it has all sorts of crazy scenes, including Danny, who's only a little boy, actually having to drive a car in the middle of the night. So that's quite a funny and interesting book. Then we have the Percy Jackson series. This is the second book in the series called Sea of Monsters. The first book is called Lightning Thief. And I have to say, I think these are the funniest books I've ever read. There's 2 reasons I like them actually. Firstly, because they're funny, but secondly, because it is kind of about a boy with special powers. But in this story, it's all based on Greek mythology. We studied mythology in the first term of this year. Hopefully you remember some of the Greek creatures. We talked about chimeras. This looks like a type of chimera creature in here, in the Sea of Monsters. But what I really like is that the author makes all the characters from Greek mythology really funny. So they have all the Greek gods, but instead of just being like boring, serious gods, they're all they all have their own very distinctive characters, and they get into a lot of escapades, and it's kind of like a big adventure story. So definitely recommend the Percy Jackson series. There's actually a movie, some of you might have seen the movie, called The Lightning Thief or heard of it. Okay, just a few more. So those are 2 funny books. The next one doesn't sound like it's going to be funny or look like it's going to be funny. It's called The Series of Unfortunate Events, and it's got this evil character called Olaf in it. Again, there's actually movies of these books, and it's kind of an interesting book because sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it's really scary because it's a bit of a mystery of the 3 Baudelaire children who are trying to escape the clutches of this evil Olaf, who they don't know why, but he keeps tormenting them. So this is called The Bad Beginning, and it's very different to a lot of books because normally you always know that a book is going to have a happy ending. But some people might think that's boring because you already know how the book's going to end if you know it's going to have a happy ending. But because this is called The Series of Unfortunate Events, quite a lot of the time bad things actually happen or the book doesn't have a happy ending. So it can be very surprising and you never know what to expect. And some of the scenes in it really do make me laugh because the Olaf character is very strange and weird and he does a lot of funny things. Here's a book that hopefully you'll all know, Horrid Henry. This is the haunted house one. There's so many Horrid Henry books that you can buy, but I always used to find these books really funny because Horrid Henry reminds me of my brother when he was little. He used to be very cheeky and like to wreak a lot of havoc. So these books are quite short, they have pictures, so if I want to read something that's not too difficult and won't take me too long, then this is the book that I would read. And then the very last one, this might surprise you, is not actually a storybook. It's not a fiction book, it is a poetry book. Some of you should remember that we talked about Benjamin Zephaniah when we had Black History Month. And we even read some of his poems and watched a video of him performing his hilarious poems. You can already tell from the front cover that he's going to be a funny poet, because look at him, look at his picture there with, I think he's with the turkey from the turkey poem. And I really like his poems because the way he writes them, hopefully you remember, he's really creative. He doesn't just write them in a normal way. It's not just boring text. He's got pictures. Sometimes he lays out his poems in different ways. Look at that, the way he's written the poem. So he's so creative, and that's one of the reasons he always makes me laugh, because he does things in his own special way that always surprises me. So sometimes I don't feel like reading a whole story, maybe it's going to take me too long, or maybe I'm not in the mood, then I'll pick up a poetry book, and you can just read maybe like 1 poem before bed, and these ones I like to read out loud because they're normally written in his own special type of language. But that's it, that's all my types of books. Let's summarise. Now that I've looked at my books and I've thought about what kind of books that I've enjoyed in the past and what kind of things I like about those books, I should be able to explain what my reading preferences are. Your reading preferences means what books do you prefer, what books do you like, and what types of things do you prefer in your books. So let's have a look at the exact task, how it's laid out, and then I'm going to summarise what kind of books I prefer to read. So the task you're going to do today says, using the sentence starters below, explain your reading preferences in as much detail as possible. So the first sentence starts, at the moment I like to read, oops, where's it gone? There it is. At the moment I like to read. Now the reason I've started this sentence at the moment is because your reading preferences can change. Sometimes when you're little you like to read one type of book, and then as you grow your taste might change. For example, all these books that I showed you are fiction books, because when I was younger I only used to like reading fiction books. I did not like non-fiction at all. But now my taste has changed a bit, so even though I still like these books, I don't really avoid non-fiction anymore. There's still a few non-fiction books that I like to read, and I've read quite a lot of non-fiction this year. So we're just going to talk about what we like at the moment. So at the moment I like to read mostly fiction books about kids with special powers or with magic. Those are my main things that we discussed earlier. What else did I say that I liked? I liked stories with a different world in them, and I liked stories with a character that has to overcome a problem or an obstacle. So I can write. So I especially like books where the author creates new creates a new or different world for the characters to have adventures in. Sometimes I also like to read books set in the normal world, but with characters who have to overcome big challenges or obstacles. And then the final thing, so that we talked about all those different types of books, the final group of books were all books that made me laugh. So I need to write one sentence about those types of books. So I've written, alongside this, I love to read books that make me laugh or surprise me. These types of books often have funny characters and silly scenes. So I've chosen what kind of things actually make the books funny. It's normally the characters or the scenes that happen. They don't always have to be books. I also like reading comedic poetry, like Benjamin Zephaniah. So that's a paragraph all about what kind of books I like to read. The next bit of this task asks you to start a sentence with, I am not a big fan of. So when we talk about our reading preferences, we normally want to say which things we like and which things we prefer, but sometimes there might just be a type of thing that you don't like that's worth mentioning. Let me have a think. What kind of books don't I like? Oh, I know. I am not a big fan of scary stories because I not normally like to read before bed, so it freaks me out if the story is too scary. So I can say, I'm not a big fan of scary stories. So I've said, I'm not a big fan of scary stories because I mostly read before I go to bed, and if I get too scared, I can't sleep properly. Some of you might really enjoy scary stories, maybe the types of books you don't like. Some people don't like books with magic or crazy worlds in them. Some people don't like funny books. Some people don't like fiction. Some people only prefer non-fiction. So you can write what you think in this section here. The final question is, my favourite book or series is, and hopefully you should all know what my answer to that is, Harry Potter. So that's me. I've written my explanations of my reading preferences. You'll notice I wrote a lot more about my things that I like than I did about the things that I don't like, or my favourite series, because I thought that this required more explanation. But if you want to talk more about the books you don't like, that's also fine. If you're not sure what you like and don't like, just have a think of the past few books that you read. Did you like those books? If you did, why did you like them? And if you didn't, was there a reason? I look forward to reading this. I will find it really interesting to see what kind of books you like reading. Maybe we have some things in common, maybe we have some differences. It doesn't matter, I'm just curious to know. So, it's time for you to write your date and LI. So, the date is the 21st of May 2020 and the LI is to be able to talk about your reading preferences. So pause the video now and write that down on a piece of paper. And if you're still watching, that means you've written the date and LI and you're ready to start the task. So in a second, the sentence starters are going to come up on the screen without my answers in them, and I want you to use each one to explain your reading preferences in as much detail as possible. Pause the video now to complete this task. And please don't forget to take a picture of your work and send it in to this email address, year3@grange.harrow.schuk, so that I can mark your work and give you a ruby for submitting it.